My world is made of stone and shadow. For 350 years, I have watched seasons change from a throne carved from the heart of Mount Valerius. The stone remembers warmth, they say. I do not. My name is Kaelen Valerius, and I am a king wrapped in a silence so deep even my own howls cannot break it. The weight of immortality is not a gift. It is a slow, meticulous burial. You watch civilizations bloom and crumble like wildflowers. You watch faces you loved become stories, then whispers, then dust. 200 years ago, my own heart turned to dust. Althea. Her name is a secret I keep even from myself. Speaking it is like dragging silver through my soul. She was human, fragile as dawn frost, and when she left, she took every color with her. The world has been shades of gray ever since. My counsel are persistent ghosts. Elder Maxton's voice is the one I hear most, a dry rustle of parchment and politics. The kingdom needs continuity, my king, an heir, a queen to soften your solitude. Solitude, such a gentle word for this desolation. They do not understand. A mate bond for our kind is not a political arrangement, it is a fusion of souls. Mine was severed, and I am a tree split by lightning, still standing, but hollowed out. For decades I refused. I ruled, I judged, I protected. I did my duty from a throne that grew colder each century. But kingdoms are living things, and they fear a future with no seed. The pressure became a tide, and even a mountain erodes. So I made a bargain forged in bitter resignation. One ceremony, the grand choosing, an ancient tradition where potential consorts present themselves. I would sit, I would look, I would feel nothing, and then they would leave me to my eternity of gray. The morning it began, I stood before the mirror in my chambers. The face that stared back was a stranger's, strong, unaging, with eyes of molten gold that held no warmth. I am 7 feet of muscle and myth in my human form, a giant from a storybook. Today I felt like a puppet being dressed for a play. Roran, my captain and perhaps my only friend, helped me into the formal vest. "You do not have to do this, Kaelen," he said, his grizzled face etched with concern. "He is one of the few who dares to use my name." I gave my word, Roran, one final spectacle, then silence. "And if you feel the bond with one of them?" I met his eyes in the glass. "The bond died with Althea. There is nothing left to feel." The great hall was a canyon of expectation. Torches flickered, making the ancient banners seem to move. My wolves, Thorin, Gale, Cinder, Ember, and the pale, silent specter, Ghost, took their places. They are not pets. They are echoes of my own spirit, bound to me in ways even I do not fully comprehend. Thorin, a beast of midnight fur and soulful eyes, leaned against my leg. "Steady," his presence said. Then the doors opened. The air changed, thickening with perfume, ambition, and 1,000 racing heartbeats. They flowed in like a brilliant, chattering river. The first to present was Lady Lyra of House Frost, her hair a cascade of winter silver, her voice a song that made the torches dim. She offered a relic, a moonstone said to hold the light of 1,000 full moons. I thanked her. I felt nothing. The second was a warrior from the eastern ranges, Kira. She shifted in the hall, a magnificent tawny wolf, and fought a dazzling sparring match with 2 of her guards. The crowd roared. I nodded respectfully. My heart was silent. And so it went, for hours. Poetesses, healers, diplomats, hunters, each a masterpiece of breeding and training, each performance more exquisite than the last. My politeness was a wall, my indifference a fortress. I saw the hope in their eyes dim as they curtsied and retreated. A part of me, a small, bitter part, was glad. Let them see the truth. The Stone King cannot love. As the sun began to wane, painting the high windows with blood and gold, a profound weariness settled into my bones. It was almost over. The numbness was complete. I had succeeded. Then, as Lady Seraphina of the radiant house Elara began her presentation, a dance with blades that wove light itself, my gaze, drifting in its exhaustion, caught, not on her, but on a flicker of movement in the deep shadow of the western colonnade. A girl, a servant, carrying a tray of empty goblets too heavy for her slender arms. She moved with a ghost's grace, her head bowed, her dark braid a slash of shadow against her gray dress. She was utterly focused on her task, a world away from the glittering competition. Yet something about the line of her neck, the careful, economical grace of her movements, made my eyes stick. She was real. In this theater of artifice, she was the only true thing. And in that moment, watching her try to be invisible, I felt the first fissure in the ice. Not warmth, but a shocking, profound curiosity. Seraphina's dance ended to thunderous applause. She stood breathless and radiant, certain of her victory. I gave the required praise, my voice a monotone, but my mind was elsewhere, tracing the path of the servant girl along the wall. Her name, I would learn later, was Elara, but in that moment she was just a mystery, a splash of cool water in a desert of perfumed heat. She was refilling wine for Lord Baron, a bloated man with a voice like grinding stones. He snatched the cup without looking at her, his laughter booming. She shrank back, a subtle retreat that spoke of long practice. Why was I watching her? It was a distraction my weary soul clung to. The 45th noble daughter was announced, then the 46th. My eyes kept finding their way back to that gray dress, that quiet focus. Then came the moment that shattered my world. Elara had moved behind the row where Seraphina's formidable mother, Lady Morwenna, stood. The lady stepped back to whisper something to an ally, her voluminous skirts of emerald silk swirling. She did not look. Her heel came down on the hem of Elara's dress. A sharp tug, a gasp stifled before it could fully form. Elara stumbled, the heavy silver tray tilting in her hands. Time did not slow, it fractured. I saw it in perfect, horrible clarity. The pitcher of deep red wine leapt from the tray as if alive. Her hands, small and quick, flew out not to shield herself, but in a futile, instinctive grab to save the precious vessel. Her fingers closed around the stem of a single goblet, the one meant for me, the king's cup, solid gold and etched with whorls. It was all she could catch. The pitcher hit the stone floor with a wet, explosive crash. The sound was a physical blow in the silent hall, and the goblet, pulled from her grasp by the momentum, fell. Clang. The ring of gold on ancient stone was a death knell. It rolled, wobbling in a widening pool of wine that looked like blood in the torchlight. Absolute, perfect silence. Every head in the hall of 2,000 people turned as one. The focus that had been on the latest presenting noble swiveled and locked onto the small, frozen figure in the gray dress. Elara stood utterly still, her face bleached of all color, her eyes wide pools of pure, unadulterated horror. The broken pieces of the ceramic pitcher lay at her feet like the bones of her future. Then the sound returned, a collective intake of breath, a murmur that built like a wave, and cutting through it, Seraphina's voice, sharp and dripping with venomous delight. "Look at that! The clumsy scullery maid has ruined the ceremony. Such filth doesn't belong in this hall." Her words were a spark to tinder. Other nobles, their own daughters' chances seemingly jeopardized by this accident, joined in. "Disgraceful! Where are the guards? Throw her in the stocks." Elara did not look at them. She did not plead. As if moving through a nightmare, she slowly, carefully knelt in the spreading wine. She gathered the broken shards of pottery with her bare hands, placing them on her tray with methodical precision, as if by cleaning the mess she could undo the moment. A sharp edge bit into her finger. A bright crimson bead welled, stark against her skin and the dark wine. She didn't even flinch. Something in me broke. It was not a thought, it was a tectonic shift deep in my soul. a roar of fury, not at her, but at their cruelty, a surge of protectiveness so vast it drowned out 3 centuries of numbness, and beneath it a heart-breaking ache for her silent, stoic dignity. Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet, my throne rocked back with a thud that echoed. The whispers died instantly. 2,000 eyes snapped to me. I descended the dais steps, my boots striking the stone like drumbeats in the tomb-quiet hall. My wolves, sensing the storm in me, flowed around me, a living barrier of fang and fur. The crowd fell back as if from a physical force. I crossed the space, the wine soaking into the soles of my boots. I did not stop until I stood before her kneeling form, and then I, Kaelen Valerius, giant Lycan King, knelt. I lowered myself to one knee on the cold, wine-stained floor, bringing my eyes level with hers. The gasp that swept the hall was like the wind before a tempest. Her head lifted slowly. Those eyes, I saw them clearly now, not simple blue, they were the color of the sky just after sunset, when day holds its breath before night, deep and infinite and holding a universe of quiet sorrow. They were filled with tears she refused to shed, with a fear so profound it was beyond panic, and with a resignation that shattered me. She expected punishment, she expected pain. "You are hurt," I said. My voice, unused to softness, came out as a low, rough scrape. It sounded alien, even to me. I reached out. My hand, which had signed death warrants and peace treaties, looked monstrously large next to her slender, bleeding one. I took it with infinite care, as if holding a wounded bird. From within my tunic, I pulled my own linen handkerchief, monogrammed with the royal crest. I wrapped it gently around her cut finger, stanching the blood. The white linen bloomed crimson. The hall was so silent I could hear the crackle of the distant torches, the ragged catch of her breath. "What is your name?" I asked. The question was for her alone, a private thing in this most public of ruins. Her lips trembled. "Elara, my king." A whisper, yet it echoed. "Elara," I repeated. The name was a key, turning in a lock rusted shut for centuries. It felt right on my tongue, simple, true. I stood then, drawing her up gently with me. She was so light, so slight. She came up, unsteady, her eyes never leaving mine, filled with a bewilderment that mirrored the chaos in my own soul. I turned, holding her bandaged hand in mine, and faced my kingdom. I looked at Elder Maxton, his face ashen. I looked at Seraphina, her beautiful features twisted in outrage. I looked at the sea of stunned, confused, and angry nobility. I lifted our joined hands. My voice, when it came, was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of the mountain itself, calm and absolute. I announced, each word falling like a stone, "The grand choosing is concluded." I let the silence hang, heavy with disbelief. I have made my choice. I looked down at Elara, her face pale but her chin held with a stubborn grace she probably didn't know she possessed. I choose the one who serves in silence. I choose the hands that work rather than those that only receive. I choose the heart that tried to save what was breaking. I met the eyes of the council. I choose Elara. The uproar was instantaneous, a volcanic eruption of sound, shouts of protest, cries of outrage, demands for explanation, but to me it was just noise. I turned my back on it all, my body shielding Elara. My wolves closed ranks around us. Thorin let out a low, warning growl that silenced those nearest. "Come," I said to her, my voice gentle again. "You are safe now." And I led the silent Omega girl, who no one saw, out of the hall, leaving 1,000 dreams and a centuries-old tradition in ruins behind us. The silence in my private council chamber was thicker than the one in the great hall. This was the silence of shock hardening into cold, strategic fury. I had not taken Elara here. I had entrusted her to Roran's care, with strict instructions to bring her to the royal healer, then to the guest chambers in the secure west wing. "Guard her as you would guard my own life," I had told him. The look in his eyes was not of obedience, but of understanding. He had seen the crack in my armor. Now I faced the storm alone. Elder Maxton, High Counselor Voren, and Lady Morwenna, Seraphina's mother, formed a wall of affronted nobility before me. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented," Maxton sputtered, his usual composure shattered. "A servant girl, the lineage alone." "The lineage of kings is decided by strength and the will of the moon, Maxton, or have you forgotten our oldest laws? The law speaks of suitable consorts, of strengthening alliances." Lady Morwenna's voice was a whip-crack. "This girl brings nothing, no lands, no soldiers, no political capital. She brings shame." I turned my golden gaze on her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "She brings truth," I said, "a commodity that appears to be in painfully short supply in this court." I let my words hang, thinking of her deliberate step on Elara's hem. I had seen it. Had others? The spectacle today was not of her making, it was of ours, a spectacle of greed and ambition that she had the misfortune to interrupt. "The people will not accept this," Voren said, trying a different tack. "They expect a queen of stature. This will be seen as an insult to every noble house in Valerius." "The people, Voren, are not the nobles in that hall," I said, moving to stare out the window at the darkening mountains. "The people are the farmers, the blacksmiths, the weavers, the servants. They will understand a king who sees one of their own. And as for the noble houses," I turned back, a cold smile touching my lips. "Their loyalty was always conditional on their own advancement. This merely clarifies the arrangement." "What is your intention, sire?" Maxton asked, his voice weary. "To marry her? To make her queen?" The question hung in the air. I had not thought that far. My actions had been instinct, a reaction to a profound wrong. But now, "My intention," I said slowly, "is to know her. She is under my protection. She will be treated with the respect due to a guest of the crown. What comes after is for the moon to decide." It was a non-answer, but it was all I had. They left, seething but powerless for now. A king's word, especially one who has ruled for centuries, is still law. Meanwhile, in the sunlit guest chamber, Elara sat on a chair that seemed to swallow her, surrounded by luxury she had only ever cleaned. Roran had stationed 2 of his most trusted guards at her door. The healer had come and gone, leaving her finger neatly bandaged. When I entered, she shot to her feet, then seemed unsure whether to curtsy or kneel. Her confusion was a physical pain in my chest. "Please," I said, gesturing to the chair, "sit. You are not on trial here, Elara." She sat, perched on the very edge. "My king, I don't understand. Why did you do that? I broke everything. I ruined your ceremony." "You broke a cup," I corrected gently, taking the chair opposite her. I was too large for it, but I tried to make myself smaller. The ceremony was already a ruin, a hollow pageant. "But those women, they spent their whole lives preparing. They prepared to be ornaments on a throne," I said, perhaps too harshly. I saw her flinch. I softened my tone. "Tell me about yourself, Elara. Where is your family?" And so, haltingly, she told me. A blacksmith father, dead in a forge accident 7 years past, a mother lost to a wasting sickness, a grandmother, Tessa, in a small cottage in the lower village, surviving on the wages Elara sent. She was 17 when she entered the castle service, 24 now. 7 years of invisibility. "You have no other family? No one to speak for you?" I asked. She shook her head, a stubborn lock of dark hair escaping her braid. "There is no one to speak to, my king. Servants are heard, not listened to." The simple truth of it was a condemnation of my entire reign. "And what do you want, Elara, if you could have anything?" She looked at me as if I'd spoken another tongue. "Want, my lord?" "A dream, a wish, something beyond survival." She was silent for a long time, her twilight eyes looking past me, into a memory. "My father's forge," she said softly, "the smell of the fire, the ring of the hammer.
He said metal held a song, and a good smith could tease it out. I would like to learn, to make something that lasts, not just clean up what others have broken." She glanced at her bandaged finger, then back at me, as if shocked by her own boldness. A maker, not a taker, the opposite of everyone in that hall. "Then you shall," I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke. "I will have the castle smithy opened to you. The master smith, Gunnar, is a fair man. He will teach you." Tears finally welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be lying." I leaned forward. "Are you lying, Elara?" She met my gaze without hesitation. "No, my king." "I know." And I did. In her presence, the constant low hum of political deception that filled the castle was absent. It was like stepping into a clear, quiet forest. That is why. I left her then, with promises of safety and a new purpose. But as I walked the cold corridors back to my own empty chambers, the reality of what I had done settled on me. I had not just chosen a girl, I had declared war on the old order. The nobles would not simply accept this. Lady Morwenna's eyes held not just anger, but a calculating venom. Seraphina's humiliation would demand redress. And Elara, she was a candle flame in a vast, windy hall. I had pulled her into the light, but the light in my court was a dangerous place, full of sharp shadows. I had vowed to protect her, but from what? From open scorn I could shield her, from whispered poison, from subtle schemes, from the slow, crushing pressure of a world that believed she did not belong. As I entered my dark chambers, Thorin was waiting, his head cocked. I knelt before him, burying my hands in his thick fur. "What have I done, old friend?" I whispered. "Have I saved her, or have I thrown her to the wolves?" Thorin licked my hand, a rough, comforting gesture, but in the depths of his canine eyes I saw no easy answer, only the reflection of my own doubt, and the long, dangerous night that had just begun. The castle, which had been a silent monument to my solitude, now hummed with a new, toxic energy. Whispers followed me like ghosts. They slithered through the servant passages, echoed in the council chambers, lingered in the training yards. The king is bewitched. The servant used dark magic. It's a temporary madness, a grief for his lost mate. He'll see reason. I did not bother to silence them. Some battles are fought with words, and this was one I would not deign to join. My actions would be my answer. Elara's first week was a study in quiet defiance. True to my word, I introduced her to Gunnar, the master smith, a bear of a man with a burnt leather apron and eyes that missed nothing. He was skeptical, but a royal command was a royal command. I did not command him to like her, only to teach her. I visited the smithy on the third day, under the pretense of inspecting a new shipment of blade steel. I found Elara not at the anvil, but sweeping the stone floor, her hair tied back with a simple strip of leather, a smudge of soot on her cheek. Gunnar was barking instructions about the proper temperature for tempering. She listened, nodded, asked a short, precise question about airflow. Gunnar paused, then answered in a slightly less gruff tone. She did not see me at first. She was utterly absorbed, her earlier terror replaced by a focused intensity. Here, in the heat and grime, she was not an out-of-place servant or a political pawn. She was an apprentice. She belonged.
When she finally noticed me in the doorway, she started, then offered a small, hesitant smile. It was the first true smile I had seen from her, and it struck me with the force of a physical blow. It lit her entire face, reaching those profound eyes, and for a second the soot and the simple clothes didn't matter. She was radiant. "My king," she said, setting the broom aside. "Elara, Gunnar, how goes the lesson?" Gunnar grunted. "She listens, doesn't chatter. Hands are smaller than I'd like, but clever." From him it was high praise. "I am glad to hear it." I looked at Elara. "The castle is yours to explore. The library, the gardens. You are a guest." Her smile faded slightly, replaced with wariness. "The gardens are occupied, my king." I understood. Lady Seraphina and her coterie had taken to holding court there, their laughter like shards of ice. "Then claim a different hour. The dawn belongs to the gardeners and the ghosts. It is the most peaceful time." She nodded, but the shadow remained. The web of the court was already touching her. The true threat, however, came not from open hostility, but from a silk-wrapped dagger. It arrived in the form of an invitation, delivered to Elara's chambers by a smirking page in Morwenna colors, a tea and reconciliation gathering hosted by Lady Morwenna herself, to welcome the king's new companion to courtly life. It was a trap, a beautifully baited one. To refuse would be called arrogance, a confirmation of her low-born inability to learn grace. To accept would place her, alone and untutored, in a den of master manipulators. Elara brought the invitation to me, her hand trembling slightly. "I do not know what to do, my king. I have no gowns. I know nothing of tea." I took the heavy, perfumed parchment. "You will not go," I said, my voice final. "But the insult will be mine to bear, not yours." I met her worried gaze. "Elara, their world is a maze designed to make people like you and me stumble. Their weapons are gossip, nuance, a turned phrase. You have a different strength, one they cannot comprehend. We will not fight them on their chosen ground." I sent a curt, royal reply declining the invitation due to a prior commitment, her apprenticeship with Gunnar. The insult was deliberate. I was valuing a blacksmith's soot over a lady's salon. The war of whispers escalated. But I had underestimated their persistence. The next move was more subtle. It began with small things. Elara's requested bathwater would arrive lukewarm. The fresh linens for her bed would be misplaced. A particularly beautiful tray of food sent from my own kitchens would be accidentally dropped by a servant, who then wept apologies, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows where a Morwenna housemaid stood watching. It was petty, cruel, and designed to wear her down, to make her feel like an unwelcome intruder in every corner. Elara bore it silently, but I saw the strain in her eyes, the way she jumped at sudden noises. The final straw came one evening when she did not arrive for our now customary quiet dinner in my solar. Roran found her in the corridor leading to the library. A hanging tapestry, an ancient depiction of the first choosing, had fallen, its heavy wooden rods striking her shoulder and narrowly missing her head. It had been hanging securely for a century. "Accident," the chamberlain insisted, wringing his hands. "Frayed cords." But the look in Elara's eyes when I reached her was not of fear, but of a cold, clear fury. She stood amidst the fallen fabric and dust, rubbing her shoulder, her twilight eyes like chips of winter ice. She looked from the frayed cord, clearly sliced, to the empty corridor, then to me. "They want me to run," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They want me to be so afraid that I beg you to send me away." "They will not succeed," I growled, the wolf rage stirring in my blood, the urge to shift, to hunt, to tear through the castle and find the culprit was almost overpowering. "No," she agreed quietly. She bent, not to clean the mess, but to pick up a single carved wooden bead that had rolled from the tapestry's edge. She held it in her palm. "I will go to the library," she said, tucking the bead into her pocket. "Now, and I will walk through the main halls, and you, my king, will walk with me." A public declaration, not of romance, but of defiance, of protection. She was drawing a line, using my presence as her shield, but it was her will holding it up. So we walked, through the grand hall where she had shattered the cup, past the murmuring nobles in the gallery, through the gardens, now empty in the dusk. We said little, but our shared silence was louder than any proclamation.
The wolves paced with us, Thorin brushing against her good side, a silent sentinel. The message was sent. She would not be cowed, she would not be driven out, and she was under the personal, physical protection of the king and his beasts. That night, as I returned to my chambers, the weight of the crown felt different. It was no longer just a burden of memory, it was a weapon I had to wield with precision. For the first time in centuries, I had something, someone to fight for beyond the abstract concept of a kingdom. The game had changed, the Stone King was moving, and the court, watching from the shadows, felt the first tremors of fear. They had tried to break a servant girl, instead they had begun to forge a queen, and they had reminded a lonely king what it meant to have a heart that could still burn with fury, and with something else, something warmer and more terrifying that was just beginning to spark in the ruins of his soul. The tension in Valerius was a drawn bowstring, humming with a note only I and my wolves seemed to fully hear. Elara's defiance had checked the court's overt cruelty, but the poison simply went deeper, flowing into the veins of rumor and superstition. It was Vorin, the High Counselor, who brought it to me formally, his face a mask of concerned duty. "The people in the lower town are whispering, sire. They speak of omens." I looked up from a trade ledger. Omens? Aye, the unseasonal frost that blighted the early apple blossoms, the well in the market square that ran muddy for a day. They are saying the moon goddess is displeased, that the choosing was perverted, that the king's rejection of noble blood has upset the natural order.
I leaned back, steepling my fingers. It was a masterstroke. Attack not me, not even Elara directly, but weave her presence into a narrative of divine discontent. It preyed on the simple, deep-seated fears of the common folk, the very people I thought might accept her. "And what do they suggest?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Vorin had the grace to look uncomfortable. "They murmur that a proper sacrifice, a reaffirmation of the old ways, might restore balance." A cold fury settled in my gut. They were not just trying to isolate her, they were painting a target on her back, inciting the mob with whispers of witchcraft and divine wrath. "There will be no sacrifice, Vorin. The only thing upsetting the natural order is the greed of nobles who cannot accept a king's will. You may remind the people of that in your next addresses." He left, but the damage was sown. I increased the guard on Elara, but how do you guard against a story? Elara, for her part, was changing. The smithy was her sanctuary. Under Gunnar's reluctant but growing respect, her clever hands were learning their power. She presented me with her first completed project a week later, not a sword or a tool, but a simple iron candle holder shaped like a curling vine. It was clumsy in places, the joins imperfect, but it had a sturdy, honest beauty. "For your solar," she said, placing it carefully on my desk. "The draft from the balcony always blows out your candles." I was touched beyond words. In 3 centuries, no one had noticed the draft. "It is perfect," I said, and I meant it. I lit a candle and placed it in the holder. The flame burned steady, a small, man-made star in my dark world. Our dinners became the anchor of my days. We spoke of everything and nothing. She devoured books from the library, and her questions were sharp, insightful, cutting through centuries of political obfuscation to the heart of matters. Why does the Eastern Baron get a tax break for grain he hasn't grown in 5 years? Or, if the river patrols are so effective, why are the fishing villages complaining of poachers? I found myself explaining, debating, laughing. The sound of my own laughter in the stone room was a strange, wonderful echo. Thorin would often lay his great head in her lap, his eyes closed in bliss as she scratched behind his ears. The other wolves accepted her as part of the pack's landscape. Even Ghost would sometimes appear silently in a corner of the room, watching her with his pale, unreadable eyes.
The bond was not the mate bond. That had been a lightning strike, immediate and all-consuming. This was different, a slow, gentle sunrise after an endless night, a friendship deepening into something that made my solitary soul ache with a new kind of longing. I found myself listening for her step in the corridor, saving interesting scrolls to show her, watching the way she bit her lip in concentration. One evening, under a full moon that silvered the world, she asked the question I knew was coming. What was she like, your mate? The old pain rose, but it was blunter now, wrapped in the softness of time and this new presence. Her name was Althea, I said, the name no longer a shard of glass in my throat. She was light where I was shadow, human, fragile, but with a spirit that laughed at my solemnity. She taught me that a king could also be a man. I looked at Elara. You have that in common, the ability to see the man, not just the crown. She was silent for a moment. Do you still love her? Yes, but love is not a cup that empties. It is a well that deepens. What I feel for her, it is a part of me, like a scar that tells a story of survival. It does not prevent new stories from being written. I held her gaze, letting her see the truth in mine. You are a new story, Elara, and I am profoundly grateful for it. Her eyes shimmered in the moonlight, but she smiled. It was a smile of shared understanding, of sorrow acknowledged but not allowed to dominate. The peace of that moment was shattered by a howl, not from my wolves, but from beyond the castle walls, a long, wavering, desperate sound, then another, and another. We rushed to the balcony. In the lower town, torches moved like agitated fireflies, shouts carried on the wind. Rorin arrived breathless. Sire, it's the livestock pens on the western edge. Something's gotten in. A predator. They're saying it's a demon, a sign. A sign. Of course, the omens given flesh. Ready my horse and a guard, I said, already striding for the door, my kingly persona slamming back into place. I turned to Elara. Stay here, bolt the door. No. The word was quiet but absolute. She stood her ground. If this is about omens, about me, then I will not hide in the castle while others face the consequences. They need to see me. They need to see that I am not a witch in a tower, but a person who is not afraid. It was madness. It was brilliant. It could be dangerous. Then you will protect me, she said, with a faith that shook me to my core, as you have sworn to do. Minutes later, we rode through the castle gates, me on my massive black warhorse, Elara mounted behind Rorin on a steadier gelding, a company of guards around us. The wolves loped alongside, silent and deadly. The town was in an uproar. People milled in the streets, faces pale with fear, pointing towards the plumes of smoke and the terrified bleating of sheep. We reached the pens. The scene was one of carnage. 3 sheep lay dead, not eaten, but torn apart with savage, wasteful fury. It was not the work of a natural wolf or bear. It was malice. A torch had been thrown into a feed shed, now merrily burning, and in the center of the chaos, men held another creature at bay with pitchforks and fear. It was a wolf, but wrong. Its fur was mangy, its eyes rolled back, showing white, foam dripping from its jaws. It moved in jerky, unnatural circles, snapping at the air. Rabies, perhaps, or something worse. Stand back, I commanded, dismounting. The crowd fell away, their fear of the beast momentarily overcome by awe of their king. The sick wolf turned its mad eyes on me. It snarled a guttural, diseased sound. Then it charged. I did not shift. There was no honor in it. Before I could even move, a gray blur shot past me. Gale, my swiftest wolf. He met the charge mid-leap, his body colliding with the mad creature in a snarl of fur and fury. They rolled in the dirt. It was over in seconds. Gale's jaws found the other wolf's throat with precise, merciful force. A crack,
and it was over. The silence that followed was heavy. Gale stood over the body, panting, then trotted back to my side, nuzzling my hand as if to say, "My duty is done." But the crisis wasn't over. The crowd's fear, momentarily redirected, now swiveled back to its original source. Eyes, wide and suspicious in the flickering firelight, landed on Elara, still sitting on her horse. "The omen," someone muttered. "The beast came after she arrived. Unnatural."
The mood was turning. A beast more dangerous than the rabid wolf. I stepped forward, about to roar them into submission. But Elara slipped down from the horse before Roran could stop her. She walked forward, not to me, but towards the dead sheep, towards the grieving shepherd who was kneeling by his slaughtered ewes, his shoulders shaking. She ignored the crowd, ignored the danger. She knelt in the bloody muck beside the old man. "I am so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden hush. She placed a hand on his arm. "These were your best milkers, weren't they? The dun one with the spotted ear?" The shepherd looked up, startled out of his grief. "I? How did you know?" "I delivered herbs from the castle gardens to your wife last winter, when the cough was going around. I saw them in your pen." She stood, turning to face the crowd, her dress stained with mud and soot. "This is not an omen. This is a tragedy. A sick animal and a cruel person who set a fire. This man has lost his livelihood tonight. Will we stand here whispering about curses, or will we help him?" She pointed at the burning shed. "Water-bearers, form a line from the well. You, with the cart, help clear this carcass before it draws more predators. You there, your cloak is thick. This man is in shock. Warm him." For a moment, no one moved. They stared at the slight servant girl giving orders like a general. Then something broke. The village headman, a pragmatic man, bellowed, "You heard her! Move!" And they did. The spell of fear was broken not by a king's command, but by a girl's practical compassion and stunning memory. I watched as she helped organize the bucket line, speaking quietly to the women, directing the children to safety. She was not a distant, glittering queen. She was one of them, in the muck, solving problems. As the fire was doused and order restored, I walked to her side. She was breathing heavily, her face smudged, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "You knew that sheep," I said softly. "I notice things," she replied, just as soft. "It's how you survive when you're invisible. You remember details." That night, back in the castle, the howls that echoed were not of mad beasts or angry mobs. They were the triumphant, pack-affirming howls of my wolves, lifted to the full moon from the highest tower. I joined them, my human voice a deep rumble beneath their song. Elara stood beside me on the parapet, watching the silvered landscape. She didn't flinch from the primal sound. "They're singing for you," I said when the last echo faded. She looked up at me, the moonlight etching her determined, soot-streaked face in silver. "No," she said, "they're singing for us." And in that moment, I knew the first true howl of my reborn heart. It was not a sound of loneliness, but of a bond being forged in fire, blood, and moonlight. A bond that was becoming, against all odds and every plot, unbreakable. Winter came to Valerius like a silent white wolf, blanketing the mountains and muffling the sounds of intrigue. The incident with the mad wolf had been a pivot point. While the noble courts still simmered with resentment, the common people's view of Elara had subtly shifted. She was no longer just the king's bewitched servant. She was the girl who remembered a farmer's sheep and took charge in a crisis. Rumors of omens still fluttered in dark corners, but they were countered by simpler stories. She was kind to the stable boys. She helped old Tessa in the village without fanfare. She worked hard in the smithy. Her work with Gunnar was her salvation and her proving ground.
I made a habit of visiting, not to spy, but to watch the transformation. The clumsy vine candle holder was followed by a set of sturdy, well-balanced fire tongs, then a dagger. It was a simple soldier's design, but the blade was straight and true, the hilt wrapped in leather with a neat, tight pattern. She presented it to me one evening, her hands calloused and nicked with small burns. "For your belt," she said, her voice hesitant. "Gunnar says the balance is acceptable." I took it, hefted it. It was more than acceptable. The weight was perfect, the grip fitting my hand as if molded to it. "You made this for my hand specifically." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I measured the grip of your old one when you weren't looking." The intimacy of the gesture, the quiet observation, struck me deeply. "It is a fine blade, Elara, the finest I've carried." I meant it. It replaced the jeweled ceremonial dagger I'd worn for a century. Her progress was a quiet rebellion that infuriated her enemies more than any grand gesture. She was becoming useful, skilled, substantial, qualities that undermined their portrayal of her as a worthless opportunist. It was this growing substance that prompted Elder Maxton to approach me with a new, more insidious strategy. "The spring equinox festival approaches, sire," he said in council. "The people expect to see their king and his chosen companion. It is a time of public appearances, of blessings. It would be an ideal moment for Lady Elara to be formally introduced, to demonstrate her suitability." It was a trap wrapped in tradition. The festival involved a complex dance of rituals, blessing the seeds, lighting the unity flame, the royal walk through the town square. Every step was laden with unspoken rules. A misstep would be seen not as a personal failing, but as a bad omen for the planting season. They were offering her a stage, betting she would stumble. "She will be introduced," I said, my tone brooking no argument, "and she will not stumble." Preparations became a silent war. A flock of tailors and etiquette masters descended upon Elara at Lady Morwenna's generous suggestion. They came to assist the poor ignorant girl. I watched from the sidelines as they tried to overwhelm her with 1,000 trivial rules: how many steps behind the king to walk, the exact angle of a curtsy to the high priestess, which foods to touch first at the feast. Elara endured it with a patience that soon turned to steely resolve. She listened, nodded, and then did something extraordinary. She began to adapt. She didn't just memorize their rules, she analyzed them. "Why do I walk 5 steps behind you?" she asked one of the sneering mistresses. "Is it to show subservience, or to allow the people a clear view of their king as he passes?" The mistress spluttered. "It is tradition." "Tradition often forgets its purpose," Elara replied calmly, and adjusted her practice to walk 3 steps behind and slightly to my left. "Here, I am close enough for conversation, but the focus remains on you, and the people can see us as a pair, not a master and a shadow." It was a small change, but a revolutionary one. She was not just learning their game, she was rewriting its rules with common sense. The night before the festival, she came to my solar. She looked exhausted but calm. "They want me to fail tomorrow," she stated plainly. "I know."
"I don't know all the prayers. I might mix up the order of the offerings." "The moon goddess cares for intent, not perfect recitation," I said, though I shared her worry. She shook her head. "That's not what I mean. I'm not afraid of the goddess. I'm afraid of giving them what they want, a spectacle of incompetence." She looked at the dagger she'd made, now at my belt. "I have an idea, but I need your trust." "You have it," I said, without hesitation. "Then tomorrow, during the blessing of the seeds, let me speak, not the traditional words, my own." It was unheard of. The blessings were ancient, sacrosanct. To alter them was risky, bordering on blasphemy. I looked into her twilight eyes, saw no pride, only a fierce desire to be true to herself and to the people. I saw the maker, not the performer. "Speak from your heart, Elara," I said, "and I will be beside you." The day of the equinox dawned clear and cold. The castle courtyard was a riot of color and noise. I stood in my formal regalia, the wolf head clasp at my throat. When Elara emerged, a collective breath was drawn. She wore a gown of deep forest green, simple in cut but elegant. Her dark hair was braided with tiny silver threads like captured starlight. She looked not like a dolled-up servant, but like a woman of the earth, dignified and strong. She carried no ornate basket for the ritual seeds, but a simple, unvarnished wooden bowl she had carved herself in the smithy's quiet hours. The walk to the town square was a gauntlet. Thousands lined the streets. I saw curiosity, suspicion, here and there a friendly nod from a villager she'd helped. Serafina and her mother watched from a high balcony, their smiles sharp as knives. We reached the great stone altar in the square, heaped with sacks of seed grain. The high priestess, an ancient Lycan woman with eyes like milky moons, began the chant. The crowd fell silent. The ritual proceeded, the lighting of the flame, the offering of salt. Then came the moment. The priestess held out the ceremonial silver scoop for the king to take and bless the seeds. I did not take it. I stepped aside. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. The priestess's eyes widened. Elara stepped forward. She held up her simple wooden bowl. She dipped it into the sack of wheat seeds, the sound loud in the stillness. She lifted it, heavy with grain, and turned to face the people. Her voice, when it came, did not chant. It spoke, clear, steady, carrying to the very back of the square. "These are not just seeds, they are promises. The promise of the soil to the farmer's labor, the promise of the sun to the shoot, the promise of the rain to the root." She held the bowl aloft. "We ask the moon to watch over these promises, to guard them from frost and blight. But the true blessing," she looked out at the faces of the farmers, the potters, the weavers, "the true blessing is in your own hands, in the strength of your backs at planting, in the patience of your watch through summer, in the joy of your harvest feast. So let us bless not just the seeds, but the work, not just the hope, but the hands that make it real." She poured the seeds from her bowl back into the sack, a golden cascade. Then she reached down, scooped a handful, and held it out to the old farmer standing nearest the altar. "For your promise," she said softly. Tears were in the old man's eyes as he took them. A murmur, warm and approving, spread through the crowd. It wasn't the traditional blessing, it was better. It was theirs. The priestess, after a moment of stunned silence, nodded slowly, a genuine smile touching her wrinkled lips. "Well said, child. The goddess hears all true voices." The rest of the festival passed in a blur. Elara moved through the crowds, not with the distant grace of a queen, but with the engaged warmth of a neighbor. She tasted the offered honey cakes, admired a child's handmade doll, asked a woodcarver about his tools. That night, in the great hall feast, she was seated beside me. The nobles were stiff, but the energy in the room had changed. She had not just survived the test, she had redefined it. She had spoken to the kingdom's heart, and it had answered. As the musicians played, I leaned close to her. "You were magnificent." She looked at her hands, the hands that carved the bowl, held the seeds, shaped the dagger. "I was just being what I am, a maker, not a taker." "You made something today, Elara," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I could no longer deny. "You made a place for yourself, not one they gave you, one you forged." She met my gaze, and in the warm light of the hall, I saw the reflection of the unity flame and something brighter kindling between us. The ice around my heart was not just cracked, it was melting, and in its wake a terrifying, wonderful warmth was spreading, as inevitable as the coming spring. Spring blossomed, but the political frost in Belarius did not thaw. Elara's triumph at the equinox had cemented her place with the common folk, but it had poured oil on the smoldering resentment of the old houses. They could not attack her directly without facing my wrath, so they shifted their strategy, aiming not at her but at the stability of my reign itself. The first sign was from the borders. Rumors brought by nervous traders spoke of unrest among the Skald tribes in the northern passes. The Skald chieftain, a bear of a man named Jorvik, had been a firm ally, bound by treaties and mutual respect. Now, the rumors said, he was listening to whispers from southern friends who suggested the Lycan king was growing weak, distracted by a human girl, that his judgment was clouded. "They are poisoning my alliances," I growled to Roran in the strategy room. A map was spread before us, wooden blocks marking troop placements. "It's a slow siege, sire," Roran agreed, his face grim. "They mean to isolate you, to make you seem unfit, until the council or even the people demand a correction." The word correction hung in the air. It could mean anything from forcing me to set Elara aside to something far more dire. The pressure found another outlet, the kingdom's finances. Suddenly, long reliable tax revenues from the western vineyards, overseen by Voran's nephew, came up short. Poor harvest, the reports claimed. Merchant caravans from the east, protected by Morwenna-affiliated guards, were waylaid by unusually bold bandits. Shortages began to appear in the markets. The people's mood, once warmed by Elara, began to sour again as bread prices rose. Elara watched it all, her sharp mind connecting the dots. One evening she placed a ledger open on my desk. It was not a royal account, but her own meticulous record of the castle's household expenses, a habit from her years of survival.
"Look," she said, her finger tracing a column. "The price of southern wheat in the castle stores has doubled since autumn, but Gunnar's brother runs a mill in the next valley. He says the southern harvest was the best in years. The grain is plentiful and cheap elsewhere." She looked up at me. "Someone is creating an artificial shortage. They're making the kingdom bleed so the people will blame you or me." Her clarity was a lance to the heart of the conspiracy. "They are playing a dangerous game," I said, cold fury settling in my veins. "They think to make my kingdom suffer to get to you." "We cannot let them," she said, her voice firm. "You must act like a king, publicly, show strength." Her words were the push I needed. I had been trying to protect her by being a shield. Now I needed to be a sword. The next day, I called an open court in the Grand Hall. Nobles, merchants, and common petitioners packed the space. The air was thick with tension. I did not sit on my throne. I stood before it, a commanding presence, my wolves arrayed around me. Elara stood at my right side, not behind me, a partner. "Subjects of Valerius," I began, my voice echoing to the rafters. "I hear whispers of hardship, of bandits on the roads, of empty coffers and full fears." I let my golden gaze sweep over the nobles, lingering on Voran and Lady Morwenna. "I hear whispers that blame a change at court or a king's distracted heart." I paused, letting the silence grow heavy. "These are lies. The truth is simpler and uglier. There are those among us," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm, "who would starve their own neighbors, who would risk war with old allies, who would see this kingdom weak and frightened, all for the sake of their own wounded pride and thwarted ambition." A shocked murmur ran through the hall. No king spoke so bluntly. "Let this end now," I commanded. "The games are over. I am Kaelen Valerius. I have ruled for 3.5 centuries. I have weathered wars, plagues, and rebellions. Do you think I cannot see a web spun in my own hall?" I took a step forward, and the crowd shrank back. "The tax shortages will be investigated today. The captains of the merchant guards will report to Roran today. And as for our northern friends..." I turned to a side door and nodded. It opened, and in strode Jorvik, the Skald chieftain himself, his braids woven with iron rings, his laugh booming in the stunned silence. "King Kaelen," he roared, clapping a massive hand on my shoulder,
Your messengers found me. These southern snakes have been hissing in my ear, but I remember who broke bread with me after the battle of black ice. I remember whose word is stone." He glared at the nobles. "The Skalds stand with the true king, and anyone who whispers otherwise can answer to my axe." The revelation was a masterstroke, planned in secret with Roran and a fast rider. The alliance was secure. The nobles' plot to isolate me lay in tatters. I turned my attention inward. "Elder Voran, your nephew oversees the western vineyards. You will go there with a company of my personal guard. You will not return until every missing copper is accounted for. Lady Morwenna," I fixed her with a gaze that made her pale, "your house is responsible for the Eastern Trade Road security. You will personally fund and organize a royal patrol to clear it of these bold bandits. You will lead the first patrol yourself." It was a brutal, public humiliation and a direct order. They could not refuse without confessing guilt. They bowed, their faces masks of hatred and defeat. The open court dissolved. The message was clear. The Stone King was no longer enduring. He was acting, and he was not alone. In the wake of the confrontation, a fragile, tense peace settled, but the war was not over. It had just gone to ground. I knew they would not forgive this humiliation. The Whisper campaign had failed. Their economic sabotage had been exposed. They would need a new, more final weapon. My fears were confirmed a week later. Ghost, my silent white wolf, who often roamed the castle unseen, led me to a secluded corner of the library. With his nose, he nudged a loose stone near the hearth. Behind it was a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was not poison or a weapon, but something more chilling, a lock of silver hair, undiscoverably Lycan, tied with a black ribbon, and a faded painted miniature of a woman with golden eyes, a woman who looked like me, Althea's portrait. With it was a note, written in a disguised hand. "The past has a claim. A true mate's bond is eternal. Can a king betray his own soul for a pale shadow?" It was psychological warfare aimed at my deepest guilt and at Elara's greatest insecurity. They were trying to resurrect my ghost to haunt our present. I burned the note and the lock of hair, a sacrilege I felt to my bones, but I kept the miniature. I showed it to Elara that evening, my heart a stone in my chest. "This was Althea," I said, my voice raw. Elara took the tiny painting, studied the gentle face, the kind eyes. She did not flinch. "She was beautiful. You loved her very much." "I did. I do. But this," I said, gesturing to the space between us, "is not a betrayal of that. What I feel for you, it doesn't replace her. It exists alongside her memory, a different song in the same hall." She placed the miniature back in my hand and closed my fingers around it. "You should keep this. She is a part of your story. I would not ask you to hide your pages." She looked up, her twilight eyes clear. "They think this will divide us, that I will be jealous, or you will be consumed by guilt. They don't understand. Love that honors the past is stronger than love that tries to erase it." Her wisdom left me breathless. She had faced their economic plots, their social traps, their whispers of war, and now this attack on the very fabric of our bond, and she had not bent. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, feeling her steady heartbeat against my chest. The ghosts of the past whispered, but they were drowned out by the living, breathing reality of her. The war was coming. I could feel it in the air, a storm gathering on the horizon. But as I held Elara, I knew what I was fighting for, not just for a throne, or out of duty, or from stubbornness. I was fighting for the sunrise after the long night. I was fighting for the forge fire warmth that had melted the stone in my chest. I was fighting for her. And for the first time in 200 years, I was not just a king defending his realm. I was a man ready to burn the world down to protect the woman he loved.
The peace that followed my confrontation in the great hall was the eerie calm before a hurricane. The nobles, chastised and humiliated, were like coiled snakes, waiting for a moment to strike. Lady Morwenna departed with her patrol, her face a rigid mask of obedience that promised future vengeance. Voren left for the vineyards, seething. The court held its breath. Elara and I spent our days in a bubble of purposeful calm. She was often in the smithy, her skills growing under Gunnar's now openly proud tutelage. She was working on a new project, something large, shrouded under a canvas. She would smile secretively when I asked about it. A surprise, was all she would say, for when the time is right. The time, I feared, was hurtling toward us. Rorin's network of informants brought troubling news from the eastern border. The bandits Morwenna was supposedly clearing had vanished, but there were signs of something larger. Organized groups of mercenaries, well-armed and not local, gathering in the forests just beyond our territory. They bore no standard, but their new, fine steel weapons spoke of a wealthy patron. "They're building an army," Rorin stated bluntly in the war room. "Small but professional, they mean to strike a decisive blow, not wage a war, an assassination or a coup during a moment of chaos." The target was obvious: me or Elara, or both. The nobles would never dirty their own hands. They would hire outsiders to do the deed, then step in as grieving patriots to restore order, likely with Seraphina or some other pliable figurehead at the helm. "We must cancel the summer solstice procession," Rorin urged. "It's a perfect target. You're exposed, moving slowly through the city." The solstice was the kingdom's greatest celebration. To cancel it would be seen as a sign of terrible weakness, confirming the rumors that the king was afraid. It would shatter the people's morale. "We will not cancel," I said, my decision firming as I spoke. "We will use it." "Sire?" "We turn their trap into ours. Let them think we are oblivious, ripe for the taking. We will be ready." The planning was frantic and secret. I trusted only Roring, his most loyal guards, and Gunnar, who was a veteran of many campaigns. We could not move troops openly without alerting the conspirators, so we used the wolves. Thorin, Gale, and the others began to range farther at night, their senses mapping the movements beyond the walls. Their silent reports, read in the shift of their ears and the tension in their bodies, were more valuable than any scouts. Elara was not included in the martial planning, but her perception was uncanny. The night before the solstice, she found me on the battlements, staring into the dark forest. "You're expecting an attack tomorrow," she said, not a question. I saw no point in lying. "It is likely." She was silent for a long moment. "I am a liability. They will use me to get to you." "You are the reason," I corrected, turning to her. The torches cast flickering light on her determined face. "Not the method. You are what I am fighting for, and that makes you my greatest strength, not a weakness." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let me help. Not with a sword, but with what I know, with what I've made." She led me down to the smithy. Under the canvas was her surprise. It was armor, not for me, but for the wolves. Articulated plates of hardened leather and thin, flexible steel designed to protect their vital areas without hindering their movement. She had studied their anatomy, their fighting styles. There were also small, sheathed blades that could be strapped to Gale and Cinder's forelegs for close-quarters slashing. "Gunnar helped with the tempering," she said, running a hand over Thorin's customized chestplate. "But the designs, they came from watching them, from knowing how they move." I was speechless. It was a work of tactical genius and profound love. She had not tried to make herself a warrior. She had empowered the warriors she loved. "Elara, this is practical," she finished, a fierce light in her eyes.
I will not hide in a tower while you fight. This is how I fight, by protecting what protects you." The solstice dawned bright and hot. The city was a riot of flowers, ribbons, and music. I dressed in ceremonial armor, lighter than my battle gear, but still functional. Beneath my crimson cloak, Elara's dagger was at my belt. She wore her green gown, but I knew that under its skirts she had on the practical leather breeches and boots she wore in the smithy. The procession was a long, winding route from the castle to the sunstone altar in the city's heart. I rode at the front on my horse. Elara, in an open carriage just behind me, was a visible, smiling symbol. The wolves, clad in their new, strangely beautiful armor, padded alongside the carriage, drawing gasps and awed whispers from the crowd. They looked like mythical beasts stepped from an ancient tale. The air was thick with celebration, but my senses were stretched taut. Roran's men were disguised in the crowd. Archers were positioned on key rooftops. The trap was set. We were halfway through the merchants' quarter, the crowd's densest, when the storm broke. It did not come from the crowd. It came from above, from the rooftops. A rain of crossbow bolts, not aimed at me, but at the horses and the wheels of Elara's carriage. My horse screamed and went down. I leapt clear, rolling to my feet. Chaos erupted. The crowd's cheers turned to shrieks. Elara's carriage lurched, a wheel shattered. From the alleys, the mercenaries poured out, armored in mismatched steel, faces hard and anonymous. "To the king! Protect the king!" Roran bellowed, his sword already drawn, meeting the first attacker. But the attacker's strategy was clever. They didn't all come for me. A group peeled off, a wedge aimed straight for the disabled carriage, for Elara. Their goal was capture, not kill. A hostage would be a far better tool. My world narrowed to that point. I shifted. The change was not a slow morphing, but an explosion. Fabric ripped, bones realigned with a series of cracks that were lost in the din. In the space of a heartbeat, where a man had stood, was a giant jet-black wolf with eyes of burning gold. I was larger than any natural wolf, my shoulders level with a tall man's chest. A roar tore from my throat, a sound of pure primal fury that shook the very stones of the street. I charged. I became a whirlwind of fang and claw. I moved faster than human eyes could track. One mercenary was thrown against a wall like a rag doll. Another I disarmed with a snap of my jaws that shattered his forearm. My armored wolves fought beside me, a coordinated pack. Gale, with his leg blades, slit hamstrings. Ember and Cinder harried flanks. Thorin was a mountain of fury, his armored bulk crushing anyone who got close to the carriage. But they were too many. A mercenary with a weighted net lunged for Elara as she climbed from the wrecked carriage. Ghost, my silent hunter, came from nowhere, leaping to cake the net on his own armored back, entangling the man before vanishing into the fray again.
Elara did not cower. She grabbed a broken spoke from the carriage wheel, holding it like a club. When a mercenary got too close, she swung with all her strength, catching him in the knee. He howled and fell. I reached her, placing my massive body between her and the fray. I took a sword slash across my armored shoulder that sparked but did not penetrate. I killed the man who wielded it. The battle was a desperate, bloody melee in the sun-drenched street. The royal guards fought valiantly, but the mercenaries were skilled. We were holding, but barely. Then a new sound cut through the clash of steel and screams, a deep, rhythmic pounding. Thud, thud, thud. From the far end of the street, a phalanx of men in leather aprons and soot-streaked faces advanced. They wielded not swords, but massive sledgehammers, tongs, and long, sharp metal poles. At their head was Gunnar,
a hammer in each hand, his face a mask of righteous rage. Behind him were the butchers, the bakers, the cobblers, the common folk of the merchant quarter. "No one touches our girl," Gunnar roared, and the makeshift army echoed him with a wordless bellow. They fell upon the mercenaries' flanks. A sledgehammer could crush armor where a sword might glance off. A hot branding iron from a baker's forge seared through a tunic. The tide turned violently. Seeing their plan collapse, the remaining mercenaries tried to flee, but the people's vengeance was swift. It was over in minutes. The street was a tableau of carnage and courage. I shifted back to my human form, my body aching, adrenaline singing in my veins. I stood bare-chested amidst the ruin, breathing heavily, Elara safe at my side. She was pale but unhurt, her club still gripped in a white-knuckled hand. She looked from Gunnar's grateful nod to the cheering, weeping people who had risen to defend her. I walked to the leader of the captured mercenaries, held by Roran. I didn't ask who hired him, I already knew. I looked down at his terrified face. "Tell your employer," I said, my voice cold and flat, carrying in the sudden quiet, "that their war is lost. The king they tried to undermine is still here. The girl they tried to use is the loved, and the people they tried to manipulate are now my army." I turned my back on him and faced my people. I raised Elara's hand in mine, our joined grips bloody but unbroken. The cheer that rose then was not for a ritual or a tradition. It was raw, real, and deafening. It was the sound of a kingdom choosing its king and its queen. The storm had broken, and we had weathered it, together. In the wake of the solstice attack, Valerius was a kingdom reborn, but one standing amidst the smoking ruins of its old politics. The mercenaries, under persuasion, gave evidence implicating houses Morwenna and Voren, along with a handful of other minor lords. They had pooled their resources, using trade gold to hire the blades meant to spill royal blood. There was no trial, there was no need. The evidence was irrefutable, their guilt written in the blood of fallen guards and citizens in the merchant quarter. I acted with a finality that brooked no argument. I stripped the traitorous houses of their titles, their lands annexed to the crown. Their family members were exiled, not executed, a mercy they did not deserve, but one Elara quietly urged. "Killing them makes them martyrs, exile makes them a warning," she said. Seraphina and her mother were sent across the southern sea, their beauty now a faded memory. Voren was condemned to live out his days in the very vineyards he had robbed. The purge was swift, clean, and terrifying. The remaining nobility fell into line, their loyalty now sharpened by a very real fear. But the true change was not in the court, it was in the streets. The uprising of the Hammers, as it was now called, had forged a new bond between the crown and the people. Elara was no longer just the king's chosen, she was their girl, the one the blacksmiths and bakers had fought for. Her story, orphan, servant, survivor, defender, became the kingdom's story. As summer peaked, the council, now filled with newer, younger faces I had vetted myself, came to me with a formal proposal. Elder Maxton, who had remained cautiously neutral and was now thoroughly cowed, presented it. "The kingdom has healed, sire. It has chosen. The people, the moon, and the crown are aligned. It is time to make permanent what the heart has already decreed." He placed a parchment before me, a formal proposal of marriage to Lady Elara and her coronation as Queen of Valerius. My own heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the final step, not chosen in a ceremony of manipulation, but earned in fire and loyalty. I looked at Elara, who sat beside me in the council chamber, her face serene but her eyes wide. "The council's will is clear, but this decision is not theirs to make alone. Elara," I turned fully to her, taking her hand before them all, The crown is heavy, the life is not your own. The eyes of history will judge every step. Before these witnesses, I ask you not as a king, but as Kaelen. Will you stand beside me, not just as my heart's choice, but as my queen? Will you share this burden and this glory? Tears spilled freely down her cheeks then, but her voice was steady as granite. I am not a noblewoman. I will make mistakes. We will make them together. I may never give you an heir. The kingdom's heir is its people. We will rule for them. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Then she smiled, that radiant, world-changing smile. Then yes, Kaelen, my answer is yes. The wedding was not in the grand hall, but in the sunstone square where we had fought side by side. It was not a spectacle for nobles, but a festival for the kingdom. Garlands woven by the children of the lower village draped the altar. Gunnar gave her away, his eyes suspiciously bright. The high priestess who had accepted her equinox blessing performed the rite. Elara wore no imported silks. Her gown was of deep blue Valerian wool, embroidered at the hem with silver threads in the pattern of wolf tracks and forging hammers, a design she had drawn herself. On her head was a circlet I had commissioned, but its centerpiece was the crude, beautiful iron vine from her first candle holder, now set in silver, a crown that held her first creation at its heart. I wore my simple armor, her dagger at my side. My vows were not of politics, but of promise. I vow to see you always, to value your truth above all flattery, to be your shield and your student, your king and your man, for as long as the mountains stand. Her vows were simpler. I vow to be your truth, to walk beside you, not behind you, to build with you, not just reign with you, for as long as my heart beats.
When the priestess declared us bound, the cheer that erupted from the thousands gathered shook the foundations of the city. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. The coronation followed immediately. As the sun reached its zenith, I took the heavy, ancient queen's crown, a thing of platinum and moonstones, and lifted it. But I did not place it directly on her head. I held it before her. "This crown is a symbol of the old ways," I said, my voice carrying. "But you are the beginning of a new way." I then took her own vine circlet and, with a nod from the priestess, gently placed the queen's crown around it, so the simple iron sat nestled within the platinum and jewels. Wear the legacy of Valerius, but never hide the truth of who you are. I placed the combined crown on her head. It was a perfect fit. She stood, and the people knelt, not in fear, but in acclamation. Queen Elara, the servant, the smith, their queen. Our reign began not with a period of quiet, but with a whirlwind of purposeful change. With Elara's keen eye for truth and my experience, we reformed the tax codes, breaking the monopolies of the old houses. She established public schools, first in the capital, taught by scholars and craftsmen alike. A kingdom is only as strong as its least educated child, she declared. We traveled constantly, not in lavish processions, but in simple convoys, visiting every valley and village. She would sit with the elders, listen to the farmers, play with the children. I would settle disputes, reinforce laws, plan defenses. We were a team. She was my conscience, and I was her strength. The love between us, born in curiosity and forged in adversity, deepened into a profound partnership. It was not the frantic, all-consuming passion of my youth with Althea. It was a quieter, steadier flame, a hearth fire that warmed every room we entered, that fueled our purpose. We argued sometimes about methods, about pace, but we never argued about the goal, a Valerius that was just, strong, and kind. Years passed.
5, then 10, Elara's youth matured into a graceful, powerful womanhood. Her hands, though often clean for court, still bore the faint marks of the smithy, which she proudly called her royal seals. We never spoke of children. The topic felt irrelevant amidst the vibrant, growing family of our kingdom. On the 10th anniversary of our coronation, she led me blindfolded to a new building on the castle grounds. It was a school, but unlike any other. Above its door was not a book or a crest, but the symbol of a hammer crossing a quill. "The Academy of Making," she announced, pulling off the blindfold. Inside, benches were set before forges, looms, potting wheels, and writing desks, where children can learn to read and to build, to think and to do, where a farmer's son can learn engineering, and a lord's daughter can learn blacksmithing if she wishes. It was her masterpiece, a monument to her belief that value came from creation. I held her close, my heart too full for words. She had taken her pain, her invisibility, and had built a legacy of visibility for everyone. That night, under the moon, we stood on our balcony, her head resting on my shoulder. The kingdom slept peacefully below. "Are you happy, Kaelen?" she asked, the same question from the mountainside so long ago. I looked at her, at the silver threads now mingling with the dark in her hair, at the laugh lines around her brilliant eyes, at the strong, truthful curve of her mouth. I thought of the stone king I had been, floating in a gray sea of time. "Happy?" I said, kissing her forehead. "I am alive, Elara. You did not just become my queen, you brought a dead king back to life. You are my sunrise, my forge fire, my truth. You are my home." She smiled, a contented, peaceful smile. "Then we are both home." We stood there, wrapped in each other and the quiet hum of the kingdom we had built together, until the first light of dawn once more began to color the sky. 47 springs bloomed and faded after the day I knelt in the spilled wine. The weight of centuries feels different when shared. It is no longer a burden to be endured alone, but a tapestry to be woven together, thread by precious thread. Elara's hair turned fully silver, a crown nature bestowed that was more beautiful to me than any jeweled diadem. Her steps, though often quick and silent, became slower, steadied by my arm or a carved walking stick she made herself. The fierce blue of her eyes softened, but the truth in them never dimmed. It deepened like a well that had found an underground sea. Our rule was seen as a golden age. The Academy of Making flourished, producing inventors, artists, and wise leaders. The wolves grew old beside us. Brave Gale was the first to go, then Ember, then Cinder. We buried them in the sacred grove behind the castle, under moon-washed stones. Thorin, my ancient shadow, lived to a tremendous age, passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night with his great head on Elara's lap. Only Ghost remained, a silent white wraith that seemed ageless, watching over us as we had watched over the kingdom. The council once feared a childless reign would mean chaos. They were wrong. We nurtured a generation of leaders, chosen by merit, not blood. Our heir was not a single child, but the resilient, hopeful spirit of Valerius itself. I watched my fierce, truthful queen grow frail. The hands that had held a hammer and a scepter now sometimes trembled. A winter cough lingered in her chest long into spring. The castle healers, the best in the land, could do little but offer comfort. Time, the one opponent even a Lycan king cannot defeat, was claiming its due. She refused to be an invalid. On her last good day, she asked to be taken to the smithy. Gunnar was long gone, but his grandson now oversaw it. The fires were banked, the tools silent. She sat on the stool she had used as a girl, running her fingers over the familiar nicks in the anvil. "I made a life here," she said, her voice a whisper of her former strength, but still clear. "From broken pieces I made a life." I knelt before her, as I had so long ago, taking her hands in mine. "You made my life, Elara. You made this kingdom's life." She smiled, a ghost of her radiant grin. "We made it together." She cupped my face, her touch as light as a moonbeam. "Do not be the Stone King again, Kaelen. Promise me. When I am gone, remember the warmth. Let it guide you." "I cannot imagine the dawn without you," I said, my voice breaking for the first time in centuries. "Then look at our people," she breathed. "They are our dawn every day. Keep them warm."
That night, in our chambers filled with the memories of a shared life, the iron vine candle holder, the first dagger, drawings from academy children, she fell asleep in my arms. Her breathing grew softer, shallower, like a tide gently receding. I held her, whispering stories of our life, of the equinox blessing, the uprising of the hammers, the first students at the academy. As the moon reached its peak, she took one last quiet breath, and then she was still. The silence that filled the room was different from all the silences I had ever known. It was not empty, it was full of her, full of 47 years of laughter, debate, love, and purpose. The pain was a physical rending in my soul, a howl trapped behind my teeth. But it was not the desolate, frozen agony of Althea's loss. This grief was wrapped in gratitude, in completion. We had had our time, a full, glorious, world-changing time. The kingdom mourned. They mourned their queen, the servant girl, the mother of their new age. They lit candles in windows, placed simple hammer and quill symbols on their doors. They did not weep for a distant monarch, but for a friend. I did not retreat into stone. I kept my promise. I ruled for another 50 years, guided by the warmth she had kindled. I told her stories to every child who would listen. I walked through the academy halls, her presence alive in every ringing hammer and eager question. When the time came for me to step down, the transition was smooth, the council and the people choosing a worthy successor from the academy's first generation of graduates, a woman who was both a philosopher and a stonemason. On my last night as king, I stood alone on the parapet, an old man in a young body, ghost a pale shadow beside me. I looked at the vibrant, peaceful kingdom below, at the lights of the academy, at the quiet forge. I thought of the 2,000 women who had fought for a crown, and the one silent girl no one saw who had fought for a people. I had lived centuries. I had known profound love twice. The first was a blazing star that left me in darkness. The second was the steady, rising sun that taught the darkness how to bloom. From my pocket, I took the small, faded portrait of Althea and the iron vine from Elara's first crown. I held them both in my palm, two loves, two halves of a king's soul. Then I looked up at the endless starry sky. "Thank you," I whispered to the moon, to the memory of light, to the truth that had found me in the most unexpected place. "Thank you for letting me see her." And for the first time in my long, long life, I felt not the weight of time, but its fullness. The story of the Stone King and the Silent Omega was over, but the kingdom of truth and making they had built together, that story, I knew, would dawn again tomorrow and every day after. This is the end of the episode. If you liked this episode, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next one. Comment part 2 if you want more.